Welcome back to Mastering 3D in Photoshop. My name is Kirk Nelson, and we are beginning the final chapter of this class, which is called Getting Creative. In this chapter, we'll go through a type of grab bag of different techniques that don't really fit into the previous projects, but are really worth getting to know. And in this lesson, we talk about the unexpected extrusions. Now, we've seen the way models can be formed in Photoshop, and as you can probably tell by now, it's not exactly the best modeling program on the planet. There's a lot going on with this that could really be improved as far as trying to generate custom models. But if you use what's there in a creative way, you can get a little bit more than you might realize. Essentially, you need to find a way to almost hack the extrusion settings and the features that it's associated with extruding paths or layers. So let's look at the different ways you can extrude a path and what that will turn out looking like. I've got my rectangular shape tool selected, and I will just fill it with a standard gray. Now let's go to the 3D panel, 3D extrusion, hit create, and let's take a look at what's available to us. First, we'll move things around a little bit so you can see that, yes, indeed, that's a 3D cube. We extruded that square. Let's grab that rectangle and look at some of these shape presets. Now, we've explored a couple of these, but some of them are actually rather creative. Like if you look at the screw version here, it extrudes that in a very circular and twisty spiral-shaped pattern. You can lengthen that out. You can adjust the width and the angle of the bevel. And if you go to the deform area of the properties panel, you can adjust the twist. So make it twist in tighter. You can adjust the taper so it tightens up as it goes down. So you can make like a screw pattern. You have these horizontal and vertical angles on the bend and shear to further distort the way this thing looks. So there's all sorts of different things you can do with that. There's also all sorts of different things you can't do with that. In this lesson, we're going to talk about some creative uses of these extrusion properties, and we are going to create a teapot. So to start, we'll begin with this circle, or this ellipse as it's called, and we'll extrude this into the spout of that teapot. So once again, we have that selected, 3D extrusion, create, and let's turn it sideways just so we can see it a little bit better. All right, so with that extruded ellipse selected, I'm going to the deformation or the deform area of the properties panel, and I will increase the extrusion depth to a pretty substantial amount, and I'm going to adjust the taper. Push that up to nearly twice what it was. 176 is about where I'm going to go with that. Now you can see how this creates sort of a chopped off cone, and we need that spout to have a curve in it. So that's what this bend on the horizontal angle is going to give to us. And so that gives us that little curved spout part that we would expect to be on the front of the teapot. In fact, I think I'm going to pull that angle back a little bit, maybe extend the extrusion depth some. And remember, you can still use the overall scalings to further control this until we get a nice spout-looking front for our teapot. So next we will work on the main body area of the teapot. Now I've got this shape sketched out using the pen tool. This is a regular path. I started with a half ellipse and added some additional points to it so that it looks like a half profile of the actual belly of the teapot. So we'll take this layer and again go back to 3D extrusion. Now on this one, instead of pushing it back in 3D space, let's use a different preset. Let's use this Revolve 360 or Bend X 360 right, as they're calling it, preset. And it makes a cylinder out of that. In fact, if we look up here in our secondary window, we see that that makes exactly what we don't want. Because what it's doing, it's revolving the path around this far right edge. And we need to tell it to revolve it around the far left edge. We do that in the deformation axis area here. See this little highlight on these dots? That's showing the axis of the revolution. Let's change that to the far left one. And we get something that looks a little more like what we're wanting to do. But because of the extrusion depth, it's kind of offsetting it. So we'll pull that extrusion depth down to 0. We'll zero it out, and that creates a much more expected revolution for this teapot body. Now that very technique that we just did there, that revolving a path around a central axis, is very, very useful and is used for creating all number of different objects. But there are always objects that are going to need to at least start with a basic round shape to them and are fairly symmetrical. So now let's move on to creating the handle. So once again, I've created a shape. This time I began with just a simple ellipse where I edited that bottom control point to pull it over, and I just copied that outer path and pasted it into the middle part of it, scaled it down, and set its mode to subtract so that it creates this ring pattern here. This comes through as just one single shape, and this is what we will use for the handle. Let's hide the base of it for the time being. Go back to our 3D panel. Once again, use it as an extrusion. Now this one's a little bit different because the way we're going to do this is to use standard bevel preset. Make sure we come over to the cap section and we'll change this cap from the front to front and back. All right, we'll change the contour to be this nice rounded curve, this half round here. And the width is at 27%, angles at 25. The inflation angle we'll keep at 45%, but we'll increase the strength to 22. Now as we look around that, I like the edges there, but it's a little bit too thick. So let's go back to our extrusion depth and pull that down. Whoop, too far. And that creates at least a nice, believable, flattened handle for us to work with. I've gone and rotated it around all over the place. I will zero out those rotations so that it starts out nice and flat for our next step. And that is to combine all of the 3D elements together and form them into this teapot. So I will simply grab all three of these and go to 3D, merge 3D layers. And that puts them all in very bizarre and strange places, which means we have to grab each one individually and begin moving it and rotating it and scaling it around so everything fits where it's supposed to fit. Be sure to use the top view to help with this. Don't forget that it's there, otherwise you may drive yourself mad. Also, a great tip is to start with one element, perhaps the actual pot itself. Make sure that there's no rotations on that, because that can really get annoying sometimes. And put it as close to that origin point as you can. Makes it easier to snap things to. And then move the other elements to match that. And here we go. Now I've got the spout positioned over there, teapot base there, and the handle here. Now each of them are individual elements at the moment, and it's really easy to accidentally move them out of place. So to kind of glue them together, select all three of the meshes, right click, and say Group Objects. This puts them into a single group that we'll call Teapot. That's just for your own convenience. So next, we need to make sure it looks like it's kind of metallic and shiny. So I'm going to grab all of the materials, with exception to this Ellipse 1 front inflation material. That is the hole on the top of the spout. We don't want that to look metallic. We want that to look black or empty. So on that one, I will reduce the opacity all the way to 0, and we have an open spout. Then on the rest of them, let's apply one of those metallic shaders that we were using before. Metal Silver 2. That comes in really, really bright. Let's put that specular down a little bit darker. That helps. Let's adjust the shine. Ironically, or counterintuitively, the more shine you put on, the smaller the specular is. And then let's pull down on that reflection some too. There we go. That's starting to create some appearance there on that metal. Now I'm going to map the environment to a base setting that we used before with the compositing project, and it's just a rough pano so that we can see it being wrapped around. From there, we'll render. And ta-da! There's our final render of a teapot that was modeled completely and entirely through different extrusions within Photoshop. I know that seemed a little bit odd, but the modeling tools within Photoshop aren't really as robust as they probably will be in just another few years. But right now, there are lots of things you can do. You just got to know what the tools can do and how to sort of stretch them and make them do what they don't want to do and be a little bit creative with it. I hope you guys enjoyed that and that's inspired you.